Our next presenter will be starting in just a minute. I'm hoping that Laura's able to promote them up to a host or a panelist, and we will get them started in just a minute. But in the meantime, remember that we are on social media. We're on Instagram at Youth-A-Thon, and we are sharing all the highlights there. So please do feel free to share your favourite sessions so far, quotes that you've found really inspiring, or advice to other people, because that way we can spread the message about how amazing our oceans are. So I am now going to introduce our next speaker. So we have with us now Marie Eslopor, who's a community development advocate who works with coastal communities in the Philippines. He sees the power within the people as drivers of progressive change, and he helps implement community-based projects and camps for Indigenous youth to help communities learn new skills that help protect the environment. His master's programme research seeks to help facilitate community-based sustainable tourism in the post-pandemic recovery setting. Marie Eslopor is part of the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative, PANI Hub, the Asia Pacific Climate Project, Sea and the Earth Advocates. I'm going to apologise, I have a very noisy dog in the background. Camp Network of Safe Philippine Seas. He also conducts webinars and youth discussions on topics like climate change, environmental conservation in shared territories, sustainable tourism, and socio-ecological and political effects of plastic pollution. He's a member of the World Ocean Day Youth Advisory Council, and he seeks to understand how the local marine environmental issues affect communities around the world. And Marie is going to be speaking on strengthening communities and conservation. So thank you so much for joining us today, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Mary. My apologies as well with my dog here. So I'm really thrilled and I'm really excited in sharing to you our topic for this afternoon. So allow me first to share my screen. All right, that's great. So this afternoon, we will be talking about strengthening communities in conservation, narratives and lived experiences. So basically, as Miley introduced me, well, if you would look at it, it may sound that I'm really into conservation. I'm really into science or the science of environmental conservation. When in fact, um, me as a person, I'm really enthusiastic in engaging with our communities, with my previous experiences and of course my undergraduate degree, which is community development. So this time we will be talking about strengthening communities and conservation. So why do we talk about why is it strengthening? Because basically we acknowledge and we understand that communities have the power of conservation emanates from our grassroots communities, to which these are vital point of views on how are we going to relay or how are we going to address such conservation issues. So before I start, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Marie Eslopor. I'm from the Philippines. And yeah, I'm an environmental education advocate. And I do environmental conservation advocacies, research, and community development works. Well, basically, I started these kinds of things back in 2013 or 20, sometime in 2013 or 2014, wherein I was still seeking about um my purpose in life and how am I going to to make a change or rather make a difference. Well, good thing that I was able to encounter few people who made me realize that the field of conservation, oh, well, it's never easy, but it was always worth it. So to begin, our talk today. Well, yeah. By the way, I'm sorry I forgot to greet everyone. Good morning from the eastern part of the world. And yeah, good afternoon or good evening here in the eastern part of the world. So our talk today will be revolving around conservation, communities, and of course, commitment. So as you can see here, this picture, I picked this picture because for me it's really like sharing other stories. It's really powerful. Wherein I got this from my research community in a very isolated place in an island here in the Philippines, wherein they tend to engage in fisheries and tourism at the same time. Well, sadly, right now, we're really having a hard time due to the pandemic lockdowns, but we're still thriving in order to conserve our environment and at the same time support our people. So let's start. Conservation. Conservation is no longer an unfamiliar nor it's already a mainstream concept nowadays, most especially for environmental advocates or even in social media, since conservation really equates to the act or the science of how do we take care of the nature of our resources. Well, basically, it's right. However, this time I'm gonna show you or I'm gonna share my bias with you. Conservation is also a social science wherein it is an intersectional aspect that um of how people, the communities, the government, or even the non-governmental organizations interact with each other on how do we implement or how do we protect our natural resources. So to navigate you a bit with my community, well, I'm from the Philippines. So basically, as you can see here, it's a map of some of the countries in the Southeast Asia, to which we're blessed and at the same time challenged that we are part of the so-called Coral Triangle, to which, well, 76% of all known coral species are here. 37% of the world's coral reef fish species are here, and also six out of the seven of the world's marine turtle species are here, and of course, 130 million people directly dependent on marine natural resources. It's so fascinating that we see these statistics that the coral triangle is really rich. The coral triangle is really a diverse area wherein we see the beauty of our marine resources here. However, on this narrative, we tend to forget how are our people, and at the same time, what are the challenges that continues to press our communities in order for us to push through conservation. Moving on, in a study of Carpenter and Springer in 2005, it was coined that the Philippines, as part of the Coral Triangle, is dubbed as the center of marine biodiversity, to which it has 468 species of um, scleractinian corals and 1,755 reef-associated fish species. And imagine having 5 out of 7 of the world's marine turtle species and a very vast 16,800 um, square kilometer of coral reef cover and 19 species of seagrass and of course 648 species of mollusks. Imagine Philippines as as an archipelagic country wherein most of our communities are really immersed or engaging in um, coast fisheries and coastal activities. That is why to it being born in the Philippines is really somehow associated to being a part of the ocean. So I will show. I will in this slide. These are some of the activities that I was able to immerse, to join with local communities engaging in fisheries. So in the first picture, you can see she's one of my good friends in the community wherein I joined during low tide. I joined her in uh, gleaning. So basically, we're getting shells for them to as part of their either if these shells are a lot, it can be sold in the market and be a source of livelihood. Otherwise, if it's just small, it will just be for sustenance. On the other hand, we have here fishers, local fishers who are fixing their fishing nets and uh, to which this has been an activity wherein a familial activity wherein from the father down to the youngest child participate in these activities. And of course, we cannot deny the fact that among coastal communities, tourism is always an emerging industry to which either it boosts our communities, but at the same time, it's a double-edged sword which creates the unsustainable activities creates the halting or the impacts, the negative impacts, not only to our communities but also to the environment. So as we look at it, as we look closer on this aspect, although the Philippines and the countries in the Coral Triangle are really blessed to have a lot of these marine resources, a lot of um, natural resources, we are also plagued with the impacts to the Philippine coastal areas. 60% of the Philippine population lives in coastal areas. So basically, as what I have mentioned in the previous slide, 60% of that um, 36,000 square kilometer coastal area are covered by communities to which there are a lot, thousands or millions of families are reliant to our coastal resources. And then aside from that, 17% increase of fish production, to which the higher the population, the higher the demand. The higher the demand is also needed for us to feed our people, our community, and thus, sometime in the early 2000s, 70% of the mangrove forests in the entire Philippines were converted into aquaculture, and some are logged and some are reclaimed, thus leaving our some of our coastal ecosystems very vulnerable, to which it has also consequences to our coastal communities being more exposed to typhoons, to tsunamis, to tidal waves. And then, of course, we have here overfishing and destructive fishing practices, to which sometimes, although if we look at these issues on a multi-perspective aspect, we do not only look at it as an unsustainable issue or an unsustainable practice of fisheries. However, we also need to look at why did they engage that? Was it because of poverty? Was it because of desperation? Was it because of miseducation and the likes? Thus, we also have here increased pollution, which is correlated with the development, which is common in our communities nowadays, to which it is just um, centered on industrial development. And of course, the one that we can never deny, climate change and the pile-ups of anthropogenic activities to which it really leaves great or worse impact to our seas and to our communities. Moreover, as we celebrate the diversity of the Philippines, as we celebrate uh, the very rich marine biodiversity in the Philippines and in Asia, unfortunately, we are also a culprit of a narrative wherein we cannot deny that we have been contributing a lot of plastic waste in our seas and in our ocean, to which, as the entire World Ocean Day Youth Advisory Council um, reiterates that our ocean is just one. Anything that happens in our localities, how small it is, will have an impact to the other parts of that very vast, very big ocean. In a study by Jumbeck et al. 2015, it was pointed out that um, Asian countries are one of are the at the top of the culprit of these plastic waste contribution, to which China having 3.3 million metric tons, Indonesia with 1.9 million, and of course Philippines having 750,000, together with Vietnam and Sri Lanka. Imagine these issues, imagine these activities. These are the ones that um, make imagine these issues not only as an environmental issue. However, we also need to look at its intersectional issues, to which poverty is an issue, capitalism will always be an issue, and thus the millions of production of these plastic waste are the main reasons why people are um, encouraged to utilize these things, thus leaving them to our ocean. In this picture by Clark and Jupiter in 2010, this is really a great example, or this is the best um, diagram wherein I can explain to you how the dynamics of our simple actions, create impact. Either it is good or it's bad to our ocean. To which that we really need to acknowledge that our fight or our movements towards protecting our ocean is really not isolated, despite where you are located in this planet. We're in the activities from our ridges, loggings, unsustainable practices, unsustainable solid waste management practices, illegal loggings, um, or other activities which may hamper our rivers, will always result to this one. If we do quarrying, if we cut our trees in the upland, and if we put our sewages in our streams, all of these will go to our ocean. Thus, imagine the and other coastal communities being very reliant to our ocean. This is what's left for us right now. So basically, we really need to act right now because there's no time for us. However, how are we going to do it? How are we going to encourage people to join this cause? Well, mainly before, personally, conservation was really a difficult concept to grasp for me since I really thought of it as a hard science. And that is why when I joined or I embodied this advocacy, I made it a point. that I promised to myself, I also want not only me to understand this advocacy, but also the people in the grassroots communities, the underprivileged, the people at the poverty line. Thus, to it, thus these movements, although these may be very small, although these individual movements are very micro if we look at the larger scale, but if millions of people do it, it's never really impossible for us to conserve our ocean. Navigating through, if we look at the movement or the aspect of the process of conservation, we also need to incorporate communities. Who are we working with? Who are the actors? Who are the people either directly benefiting or the indirect who are the people we are going to mobilize in this movement? So I will take you. This picture was taken back in 2017 when I started working with an isolated community in the Philippines, to which they are really blessed to have a very rich marine biodiversity and at the same time a lot of turtle nesting sites. However, they were not just able to put much value of the things that they have at the moment. So as you can see here, Barangay Louis is a small town in the island province of Guimaras, which is located in the western part of the Philippines. This community is a an agriculture and fisheries community, to which they have abundant terrestrial and marine resources. They also have we can also find two species of marine sea turtle and their nesting grounds here, to which it's the green sea turtles and the olive ridleys are are active are members of its ecosystem here in this community. This community has been engaging in fisheries activities since the beginning. However, at the moment, um, they were able to address, or like they were able to acknowledge their potential towards being a tourism hotspot. And thus, this led to the community um, slowly engaging in the tourism. So basically, this community, as you can see in the background, Lawi is really um, a small community, and then thus they have a large population, a large majority of their population are fishers and farmers, to which 70% of their working class are considered to be farmer fishers. Meanwhile, the remaining 15 and 15 are farmers only and fishers and farmers. Imagine our coastal communities being exposed in the field of fisheries, conservation, tourism, but just yielding 41.88 US dollars for an average monthly income. This leaves the community very uncompensated, disenfranchised, unempowered, to which this defeats the purpose of a holistic move in conservation. Thus, in the community, in the research that I conducted, we were also able to identify emerging issues, to which, despite despite the Philippines um, having a very rich marine resource, people are not able to acknowledge um, its importance. which is because of more on socio-economic issues, thus having unsustainable fisheries to which large companies, commercial fishers, continue to engage troll fishing, fishing inside marine protected areas, and what's worse is that they still continue dynamite fishing, which is just adjacent to our marine protected areas. Although some people keep on telling that this narrative is just a microcosm or just a very small part of the larger community. But these issues, if a lot of people are engaging in these issues, this is already we can already depict the main reason why we are suffering or why are our coastal resources depleting right now. Next is that although the community was able um uh to acknowledge their potential in the tourism industry, however, people aside tourists or like other people were not able to acknowledge the importance of these resources and how important are they to the ecosystem and to the communities, and thus the destructive tourism activities are really leaves worse impacts to our marine environment and of course to our ocean, to which leaving only 20% of the coral reef in the community alive. And lastly, which is one of the most invisible, however, very impactful issue in the community are the socio-economic, political, and environmental inequalities, to which our communities, they apart from looking into conservation, this aspect is no longer adhered as a priority, since how can they promote conservation when in fact they have nothing on their plate. Thus, governance sometimes in the Philippines or in some parts of the world are not that inclusive, to which most of our policies or most of our uh, implementation schemes are practiced in a top-down approach, wherein laws, ordinances, or protocols are just made from the higher ups and just being downgraded to our communities, and thus this continues this is a repeating cycle to our communities on why they suffer from these issues. And thus, what do we do now? Upon hearing a lot of problems, upon hearing a lot of challenges which hampers on how do we promote in protecting our ocean, we really need to also look at how communities contribute in this narrative. Let us reclaim the narratives. This time, it's for the ocean. Let's look at how can we contribute, and let's focus more aspects aside from um aside from being very disturbed or just being uh disturbed by uh the negative aspects of our on how we frame these issues. So lastly, on the third concept that we will be engaging in this afternoon, commitment. Commitment is such a big word to which sometimes it is more associated to love. It is more associated to um the interpersonal relations. However, commitment may also emanate or manifest on how do we put ourselves, engage ourselves in the field of conservation. As they say, change emanates from within. Although this may be a very privileged or a very um how do I say this? A very privileged or a very positivist aspect. However, change starts from within. That we really need to acknowledge that in order in us being in the conservation movement, we really never have this what do you call that, template. There's no template. There's no perfect conservation. To which actually it's really we it's really it's hard for us to continue in this movement. So where do we start in this commitment? The 5 R's is really are really a very what do you call that? Uh, mo- very famous aspect on how are we going to contribute in the conservation or the mindful lifestyle.
Refuse, reduce, reuse, and repurpose and recycle. These are the very famous R's that we tend to we were able to encounter since we started learning these things. However, aside from these concepts are important. But what I want to share to you this afternoon are some of the E's that we also need to take a look at in order to contribute or to join in the movement to save our ocean. Educating, engaging, and empowering. These are the environmental education journey that personally I want you to also look at on how are we going to promote or engage in this journey. Well, aside from just engaging people or aside from just preaching people, educating is always a two-way process. It is utilizing technical knowledge and understanding indigenous communities. In this aspect, we try to look at the dynamics of the indigenous knowledge and how it did shape communities on their current practices and their current conservation or their fisheries practices in their communities. And thus, this is where we introduce or where we incorporate technical knowledge, thus not leaving their old practices or their culture in this movement. Next is engaging. Immerse with communities and understand this situation. This has been always uh our the very for me this has always been the very important aspect of this is to which engaging really takes a very vital move to which you need to immerse, you need to better understand, and you need to be with them for us to really tell what's the problem, or before we can tell what's the issue, what's the particular issue in that community or with our ocean. And then lastly, empowering. This empowering is the ownership of the development process, which is shared in the community. Empowerment, empowerment is not an overnight experience. this takes a lot of trial and errors for the community to accept or to better understand our movement. And thus, through empowerment, they are able to realize that the issue comes from the issue. They're not only a part of the issue, but they're also a part of the greater solution of this movement. Thus, I'll sharing you some of the pictures to which how do we engage people in conservation? How do we engage communities in conservation? In some of these activities, we really tend to usually some of the early advocates are just more focused on the technical, are more focused on the science. However, engaging with the community or like bringing science or bringing the knowledge and also understanding their dynamics is a very one of the most vital aspects in ocean conservation. In this part, we conducted a focus group discussion with the community conserving for our mangroves, to which we were able to understand that their issues are not completely or entirely environmental, that they're also engaging, they're also experiencing a lot of political issues, to which conservation was not a priority of the government. Thus, aside from these, we also need to invest to our children, to which these children are our future leaders. We also need them to realize that they are our hope together with us, this generation. That the hope for our environment lies on how do we help them realize that this lifestyle is also a commitment and not just some other social media publicity or other stuff. Moreover, aside from these, in my aside from passion towards promoting environmental education, I engaged myself in learning more about the science, more of the science in conservation, because I am really eager to understand these technical concepts for us to share these things to our communities. And thus, we tend to, or we should um speak the language that our communities can understand. So basically, these scientific processes or these scientific approaches are devolved in a way that our communities will understand. And lastly, empowerment. These activities are results of our engagement with the youth, to which they were months after or a year after we started engaging with them, they already started their own movements. They already started their own movements, to which we take pride that they already acknowledged that they are part of a bigger and wider solution. Aside from like just uh not acknowledging or not realizing their maximum potential. However, aside from the three E's, we also need to have this kind of aspect. Advocate eco-friendly alternatives. Although um although advocating for reusable containers and other stuff are really in right now, but I guess it really starts from within. It really starts from a single act. mindful living. Mindful living is the concept wherein we tend to this holistic lifestyle tends to shape us to where we tend to be very conscious about our the social environment, our natural environment, and of course, we look at the things that uh, we look at our actions and the impact of our actions. This time, think twice, thrice, or a couple of times before purchasing anything. Thus, supporting progressive environmental, socio-economic, and political initiatives are really important towards promoting these and strengthening our communities, to which we need to check our local community activities, and thus environmental issues are intersectional, to which it is social, economic, and should also be addressed in this narrative, to which these initiatives may come in the form of coastal cleanups, fora, webinars, and at the same time, or just merely talking to your friends, to your neighbors about the impacts, the negative impacts, or how people can contribute to changing their narrative of the apocalyptic narrative of climate change into a hopeful tone where people can still, where the youth can still flip the coin. Next is be aware of your own impact. Practice what you preach. Ours is a finite earth, and let's be stewards of our own environment. We also need to be mindful about the way we talk, the way we express our um, emotions, our intentions of on how can we protect the environment or our ocean, to which we also need to set a good example, not just by preaching it, but also, I mean, conservation was never a job, a mere job. It's a lifestyle change. Thus, we need to incorporate it to our daily life, the way we think, the way we speak, the way we act. It's part. It's part of how we brand this conservation, this progressive conservation, as a movement that can really help our communities. Thus, like our previous sharer, she also we will also be reiterating that a single mindful lifestyle of 1 million people can create large impacts. Imagine this JM, imagine this Jose Marie Eslopor, a 15-year-old boy back in 2013, holding a pledge, I pledge to protect the Philippine sea turtles. I was a mere advocate. I was a mere conservationist in practice, in lifestyle, and in concept back then. But here we right now, sharing to the world, the people, about our conservation stories, to which I'm this is um this is a narrative wherein I am encouraging other people that starting small isn't really bad at all. Our contributions to the society, our impacts to ocean conservation or other respective advocacies starts with a single step. And thus, in this movement, it is sometimes it may be harsh, it may be confusing, or it may be um crazy sometimes. However, finding your tribe, finding the people, there's no perfect community. However, finding the community wherein you can rely on them, you can share your disappointments, you can share your milestones, you can share your insights and initiatives on how do we promote or how can we help or how do we envision in helping our oceans is already a great thing for us to keep moving forward. Because as like a single drop in the ocean, we can create ripples that will soon, together with other people, make larger impacts. And lastly, vibe check. Vibe check means in all the things that we do, although it may not be always centered on our conservation initiatives, we really we also need to look at our human side. Where where do we find our substance, our purpose, and our calling? And through these things, it is really a great help for us to continue strengthening our communities in the field of conservation, in the field of human empowerment, and other stuff. With this, I end my sharing from my local language. Madamo gid na salamat. Thank you so much, and I'll end my sharing there.
Thank you so much, Jose Marie, for that super interesting and insightful session. We do have some time though for some questions, so please do ask your questions for Jose Marie in the chat. He has a lot of experience and knowledge that, you know, we've got around 15 minutes that we're able here to be able to find out even more about how young people can take this grassroots community action. So I maybe wanted to start first by asking you, what was it that kind of sparked your interest in the oceans and your involvement in this community action?
Well, personally, before, since I was a kid, well, the Philippines is an archipelagic area. So basically, we're really coastal communities. So basically, my dad usually brings me to the sea every weekend. So basically, I can see marine animals. I can see a lot of the vastness of the sea. And like through these things, I tend to, or I was able to realize um that me vibing with the ocean or me vibing with the sea, same in Moana, I really feel that it called me. Like sometimes there are a lot of unexplainable things in our lives to which these are the ones that contribute to how beautiful or how colorful our lives can be. So I guess I'm so sorry for not being clear with the answer, but like I just felt it. And it was my natural environment. And thus me being a people person, I really invested in working with coastal communities. And that's one of my greatest passion, or in our local term, we call it hugot. Like coming from our hearts. I think that's all. Thank you.
No, I think that's so true. Like sometimes there's not necessarily like a specific thing. It's just you just feel it, and I think that really came across in your presentation, that you can tell that you're so passionate about it, and that, you know, it's something that you care a lot about. And I was wondering then, what for people that might not be familiar with the Philippines, you mentioned there about obviously it being surrounded by water. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about what the marine environment there is like? What sort of wildlife do you have living around the Philippines? And just kind of contextualize that for people who maybe aren't as familiar with it.
All right. So, well, in the Philippines, we keep on telling that our the country is really the center of marine biodiversity, since there are a lot of marine species here, to which we can see a lot of whale sharks, turtle species, and then we have very rich coral reefs, to which um I don't know if you're familiar with the Verde Island Passage, to which it is together with Raja Ampat in Indonesia. It is one of the richest coral reef area in the world. And then aside from that, there are a lot of migratory species that are also found here in the Philippines, to which we have several species of uh, we have treasure sharks near in my community, and then dugongs, and then what more? We have several species of dolphins as well, and yeah, I have here my baby together with me supporting in our youth-a-thon. Well, personally, I'm not really a diver uh nor the one engaging direct to our seas. So I guess for me that's all from my end. But I know there are a lot of marine species that I was not able to mention in my answer. So yeah, thank you, Marie.
No, I think it is amazing how we all kind of have a different experience of our oceans. You know, it does look different depending on where in the world you are, but also, as you mentioned there are these migratory species that literally do connect us. So, you know, we're talking about the fact that we all have this one global ocean, and that is so true because these animals don't know what a boundary is. They don't know when you're in one country's waters or when you're in the high seas and there's not a particular country. So, you know, that's kind of, I think, emphasizes how important it is for us to protect them. We've got a question here from Lydia in the chat. Do you have a favourite memory from working with communities in conservation issues? That's a great question. Thank you, Lydia.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Sorry. Yeah, thank you, Lydia, for the very interesting question. Well, personally, the most favorite memory for me working with and solving coastal issues is more on our virtual movement right now. We call it conflict resolution clinic. This conflict resolution clinic is more on diplomacy and international relations. However, we talk on maritime borders. These maritime borders are usually arbitral, to which I don't know if you're quite familiar with the very controversial West Philippine Sea and the South China Sea, to which this issue or this movement really made me more attached to our coastal communities and to our seas, to which um I was able to hear narratives from our communities, not only in the mainland Philippines, but also to our friends from a very small and isolated community called Tawi-Tawi, to which it has a very rich marine biodiversity, but it is also sharing its territory with Malaysia already. So in these issues, I really find it very interesting because it's not only we're not only talking about its environmental impacts, but we're also talking about the political dynamics of the people, to which either what how do we address these if ever like in one of the narratives of our partners, this fisher was this fisher crossed the border. So basically, this is already a what to call that a diplomatic issue of crossing borders. However, he was just a simple fisherman, a fisher folk, fishing for sustenance for his family. However, it blew up and it became a very large international or country issue, and thus the beauty or the diversity of how we address these issues are the ones that fuel me more to engage in these kinds of advocacies, and thus hearing more stories and realize how complex our society is, together with our complex environment and the current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic makes it really more interesting to understand and more yeah, like more narratives to unearth and uh more stories not only to tell to ourselves or to share with the local communities, but also to tell to the world, like you not like foreign people not from the Philippines. So with these, I guess these are one of my greatest experiences or memories in working with communities.
Yeah, I think that's such a strong message there with, you know, that the ocean is huge and the problems that, you know, face it are quite big. They are also solvable, but we can't forget about the individual people whose lives and livelihoods, you know, do depend on our ocean. So thank you for giving us that insight, and I know that Lydia's appreciating your answer very much in the chat also. And I kind of just wanted to finish. You kind of you mentioned a really great quote in your talk. There's no template for environmental conservation, and that one was something that really kind of struck me as being something that's very very true. Um, and I kind of wanted to ask you, it's a kind of two-parted question. What's the biggest kind of challenge you faced as part of your work, and what's your biggest learning point? So you know, it's not always easy, but what are those challenges and learning points that you've had along the way?
For me, the greatest challenge that I was able to encounter in the field of conservation was actually more of a personal rather than a technical, because ever since quick background, like me engaging in community development and psychology, I tend to be more on I tend to like linger more on the social aspects. So technically, I always get left out, most especially on the narratives when my friends or my colleagues start to talk about the science. So that's why basically I don't know if you remembered when, in my previous slides in the engaging, I really made it a point wherein I engaged myself with more science with my master's degree in Master of Marine Affairs for me to also better um implement or better navigate my passion in conservation, to which environmental education, or this passion is not only pure passion or pure heart. It also comes with the science. It is also scientific, backed by scientific studies, and through these I can better understand what is going on with the community and tell them that this is the issue, and okay, this is that's your status quo, and and facilitate how are we going to address it. I guess that's all for my end. Thank you so much, Myri.
No, I think thank you so much to you, Jose Marie. This has been so interesting, and especially kind of getting to have this discussion at the end and find out more about you and your work. I feel like we could talk for a lot longer than what we have time for today to find out about all the amazing things that you're doing. But thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your work. And everybody, please do add your appreciation for Jose Marie in the chat. But yeah, thank you so much, Jose Marie.